Let me paint the scene. Japan, 1945. The US has just dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japanese cities. The country is in ruins, but is still officially at war with the United States. Someone needs to call an end to this thing, make an official announcement. There's only one guy who has the moral authority to do that, to speak to the nation. One catch, he's never done it before. This is a little story about Japan's Emperor Hirohito. First, some backstory. Hirohito was born in 1901. When his grandfather, Emperor Meiji, died in 1912, Hirohito's dad, Yoshihito, became emperor. Old man Yoshihito, also known as Taisho, was never in good health, and by 1921, Hirohito had assumed most royal duties. When his father died in 1926, Hirohito became emperor. The decades before World War II were tumultuous ones for Japan, as its democratic institutions gave way to increased militarization. In 1940, with the emperor's blessing, Japan formed the Axis powers with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. After 4 devastating years, the Americans bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was here that Hirohito's leadership would truly be put to the test. Japan needed its leader, its emperor, to say something. Up until that point, he had been silent to the public. All throughout the war, he'd never been on the radio. When Hirohito finally addressed his crippled nation, he did so via a pre-recorded phonograph broadcast. This was known as the Jewel Voice broadcast, and it was the first time most Japanese had ever heard their emperor's voice. Hirohito spoke in stilted, formal language. He said, and I'm quoting, "The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, while the general trends of the world have all turned against her interest." That has to be one of the all-time great understatements. Japan was basically in ruins at this point. Hirohito went on to mention the enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Many of Japan's World War II leaders, like Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, were brought to trial and executed for war crimes. But not Hirohito, even though he was a leader of the Japanese war machine, complicit in so much of what Japan did. The US occupying forces under General Douglas MacArthur decided to keep the emperor around as a powerless figurehead. They figured Hirohito's blessing was important to the US goal of rebuilding Japan as a democratic ally. All Hirohito had to do was, well, not that much. He had to disavow the belief that he, like all Japanese emperors, was descended from the gods, which he did. Still got to live in the palace, though. Sometimes it's good to be emperor. Hirohito's reign outlasted the war by over 40 years. He saw a lot happen to Japan during that time. We're talking the rise of the Japanese automobile and consumer electronics industries, Godzilla movies, and the creation of the Japanese Baseball League. When he died in 1989, Japan had become the second largest economy in the world after the US. And Japan and the US were no longer sworn enemies, but close friends and trading partners. According to Japanese practice, Hirohito was given a posthumous name, Showa, which is what he's now called. The period in which he ruled is called the Showa Era. Hirohito was the longest-serving emperor in Japanese history, a period when Japan saw itself rise and fall and rise again, born on the tides of the 20th century.
Young people in large numbers came out and joined what became known as the Red Guards. These largely terroristic organizations were used to publicly humiliate, assault, and in some cases, even murder political enemies of Mao and the Communist Party.